We are finally out of our reading slump, baby. Books have been read. Hello, my dear friends. I am really enjoying doing like a commonplace entry via video format for my wrap-ups, just so that I can include mediums outside of just books. So some notes on things that we've consumed in April. April was a good month. I enjoyed it. I did want to say big congrats to The Wren by Anne Enright. It is longlisted, shortlisted for the Women's Prize. Congrats to the little Wren. But Ordinary Human Failings was longlisted alongside it and it did not make the shortlist, which what the heck. But also you can't have two caramels on that list. And I feel like Megan Nolan, she has, I don't know, I feel like a very robust career ahead of her, so it's okay that she missed on this one. I foresee a lot of great things for Nolan. I feel like this month has been a big audiobook month. Like I was looking and I think I read 2 books physically and then everything else I read on audio. Sometimes it be like that. So let's just dive in. The first book that we read in April was Catalina by Karla, Cornejo, Villavicencio. This was a fun time. I have been saying for the longest time that all I want is a plotless, meandering litfic book that centers a Latina character. Karla said, don't worry, I got you. So this is about Catalina. Catalina is a young woman, they are from Ecuador, whose parents died in an accident. Catalina was sent to live with her grandparents in Queens, New York. They come from a very working class background. They're the kind of grandparents that have sacrificed everything for her and have put so much into Catalina, so much so that she is able to go to Harvard. And so yeah, it's looking at the difficulties in being undocumented. It's looking at the weird meeting place in class mobility and what it means to have roots in all of this constraint, not just regarding her status as an undocumented person, but also economic constraint, being surrounded by so much privilege. And Catalina as a character is very dramatic. She's very smart and incisive and always has critiques about the worlds that she is inhabiting, but is also a little bit blind spotty in terms of her own behavior towards others. She's a little bit grosera, but in like a very loving way. Her grandparents are also a little bit dramatic, but their drama is more justified. We see Catalina having these wide dreams and she wants like great romance. She ends up falling for this white student at Harvard. Homeboy is studying anthropology and he's constantly explaining like Andean culture to her and she's like, bro, sit down. The ways that she navigates that romance is very interesting. She's very self-aware and very tapped into what a Disney-fied large romance entails and is in the pursuits of that. She sort of organizes things so that the chips fall in that sort of schema, but then she's also super critical. There's really no plot. At the end, there's a very faint thread of something that is grounding the story, but it's really just 150, 200 pages of us in Catalina's mind. How she sees the world, how she navigates her status, how she finds love, how she loves herself, parodies around success, what it means to have made it, absurdist explorations of the Ivy Leagues, how we sort of compete in our adversities. She has a friend who has a similar experience where she also lost her parents and their friendship is an interesting one. There are interesting dynamics in that friendship. Yeah, Catalina was just like really fun to follow along for a book. She's like kind of dramatic where like she's having a fight with homeboy. I can't remember his name. That's Nathan. She's having a fight with Nathan and she just tucks and rolls out of a moving vehicle. But even in the way that she narrativizes her life, it's a lot of fun. Like my kind of campus novel. I love this book. I want more of this. Universe, if you're hearing me, I want more of this kind of book. The book in general is very special to me because when I went to go see Megan Nolan in conversation with a writer for the release of Ordinary Human Failings, I went with Pedro, who is a lovely bookstagrammer, into poetry, edit a whole bunch of cool stuff, and is just an all-around very cool human. When we met, he brought me a tote bag, the cutest little like Dogs of McNally tote, and inside he brought me Catalina, and I was like, oh my god, that is so sweet. So I actually had him sign my edition. The next book we read, okay, story time. So this writer came out with a novel, and this novel I picked up and I read and I was like, it just felt really lukewarm to me. So I read it and I was like, it's fine, maybe like a 3-star read, put it aside, I moved on. And then everyone and their mother was raving about this book and I just didn't understand it. So the book in question was Indelicacy by Amina Cain. I feel like everyone praised it to the high heavens and said this was the best thing that has graced our good green earth in 2022. And I was just very confused. And I picked up A Horse at Night. I started reading it and I was like, I'm getting the same vibe. I'm not gonna put myself through it. For some reason, I picked it up on audio recently and I ate my words. It's kind of like a perfect listening book. I get it now. I understand. I'm so sorry. I commented on Cass's video because she had spotlighted this in her essay collections video and I was like, yeah, I'm reading this and enjoying it with my tail between my legs and a big old sari perched on my shoulders because this is wonderful. A Horse at Night is I would say like a collection also of meanderings. Amina is looking at different themes, just like her going through the different books and writers that have influenced her, how she contemplates, interrogates literature, what she pulls from the books that she loves. And I often see this described as just like something really reverent to literature and something, again, that will build your TBR. But something that I really enjoyed about this was her sort of exploration about the intangible. She has these essays on female solitude, the margins of it, when it's generative and when it's not. She was looking at darkness, like nighttime, a darkness in a room, a dimly lit street, mystery and the intimacy that comes at nighttime. She talks about the mystery that lies within snow. This book really felt like ruminations on those details that we often overlook. And I love things like that. Things that are so mundane that you kind of forget that they are experiences. I love books that hold ephemera or like hold the unholdable thing. And I feel like she does a lot of that in this book, and I really surprisingly, shockingly enjoyed this one. The next book I read on audio, and I was also super excited for this one. It was Funny Story by Emily Henry. This was a fun time. Every release of an emhen is an event, and I will always be excited for it. But at this point, I have read all of Emily Henry's books, and I feel like it's just so much fun to read through her books because I feel like there's never a consensus on what her best book is. I feel like there is a camp of emheners who really like the emotional pieces of her work. So like Beach Read is their magnus opus, whereas like for me, her least serious book, People We Meet on Vacation, is my shining star. But I feel like there's never a consensus. Like people really like all of her books for different reasons. It's just fun to like be in the discourse about Emily Henry. But I read this one with so much eagerness. The premise of this is maybe my favorite Emily Henry premise. So we have Daphne, who's dating Peter. They're actually engaged and they're gonna get married. Peter has a best friend, Petra. Petra is dating Miles. Peter and Petra, BFFs. Peter has constantly told Daphne, she's my best friend, there's nothing going on between us. Okay, cool. Daphne's trusting, Daphne is down with it. At Peter's bachelor party, Petra confesses her undying love for Peter. So Peter breaks off the engagement with Daphne, gets engaged to Petra. Daphne and Miles are just like, what the hell? Peter kicks Daphne out of the house because he's like, technically this is my home. So eventually Daphne moves in with Miles. The audacity of the story is that Peter and Petra send a wedding invite to Daphne. Daphne and Miles are drunk and Daphne says, you know what? We're saying yes, I'm doing a +1, you're my +1, we're dating now. So I didn't know what these tropes were, but this is an X swap and it's a fake dating. And I didn't know that that was my catnip, but it truly is my catnip. I had so much fun reading this. I will say that this was one of Emily Henry's least spicy books. Usually when I'm reading an emhen, I am strapped in, I am ready to just giggle and kick my feet. But this one didn't really have a lot of hot and heavy moments. There was one scene where Peter and Petra are at this event that Miles had initially invited Petra to. Oh my god, I feel like I have to draw a map. But then they're outside and they're gonna approach them and Daphne's like, Miles, kiss me, and that's their first kiss. And like initially it's like this awkward thing and then Miles is like, hold up 1 second, and like course corrects and lays it down on homegirl. And that was like the hottest scene in the book. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. There wasn't a lot of like the very over dramatic sob story stuff that I think sometimes Emily Henry can slide into, which is not my favorite. It's not like overly sentimental. The conflict was really relatable. I feel like the meat of this was sometimes we all need someone who can offer us unconditional love, and I feel like that's what Miles was. Miles was very like golden retriever like. In the ranking of emhens, this might be like my second favorite. People We Meet on Vacation will never be beat. Recommended especially to readers who are kind of uncomfortable with like overly spicy romance books. The next book we read was also an audiobook. We read Cultish by Amanda Montell. I also really enjoyed the listening experience of this one. This one was looking at how the idea of cults and how flexible the definition of a cult has become in our culture. And it was looking at how we often colloquially will like ascribe the title of cult to a lot of things. So she talks about the cult of CrossFit and the cult of SoulCycle. Then she sort of contrasts that with the very serious and very sad events that happened in Jonestown and Heaven's Gate, how it was really coerced, and not that these people didn't want to leave, but like, there were just a lot of different factors at play with what happened there. And she's talking about not only the language that cult members will use or cult leaders will use, but also how we sort of minimize the horrors of cults. She really talks about this use of drinking the Kool-Aid and how it sort of minimizes the atrocity of it. Also, it almost like blaming the victim kind of thing, where you're sort of casting aside aside this really tragic thing and making light of it. And then she looks at different aspects of a cult, so the language that they use, the sort of buy-in to that vernacular. I really like that she also was looking at the idea of what a person who would be susceptible to a cult typically is regarded as, and how that's really not it. How surprising it is to see who typically does fall to joining these sort of communities, because that's kind of what they are. I really like where the essays led to, because it was really just talking about how humans at their core are driven towards community, and that we have this proclivity towards mysticism, and we want to believe. Talks about like the strange sort of phenomenon in where like religion has sort of left a vacuum in like our age of agnosticism and atheism, and how sometimes things like CrossFit can be a placeholder for that. I will say that I didn't know much about cults to begin with, so for me it was really fascinating, and I thought that the way that the essays were organized led to sort of that kernel of we are just like seeking each other and seeking membership and seeking purpose. Was really, it was a fun time. I enjoyed this one. I don't have any real qualms about it. I listened to it on audio, and it was a good way to just clean my apartment and listen to something really interesting, because I was gasping a ton. So that was, I would say, like an essay collection done well. Now moving on to an essay collection where I was just like, what are we doing here? But I also listened to No Judgement by Lauren Oyler. Really the reason that I approached this essay collection was because I heard about the dramas with the takedown of this essay collection. So I was like, oh, bet, I'm in. This was a hodgepodge mishmashed collection of various different themes. I think what she was maybe looking at was the idea of judgment, but it didn't, like the through line for it. I think something that I really enjoy in essays is when I can see a writer leading us somewhere through their argument and through their thesis. And this didn't have any of that. And I don't think I've ever, like, that's the whole point of an essay collection. Like, you're making an argument towards something, and I want to see how you construct it, and I want to see how you move through that argument. There wasn't really much of that in this collection, but I will say that I did enjoy some of the essays. There was an essay on Goodread reviews and like the ecosystem of Goodread. There was an essay on gossip and the metamorphosis of gossip. It featured Normal Gossip, which is one of my favorite podcasts. And then there was some, I don't remember when, but she made mention of like the bad art friend. Oh, I think she was just talking about criticism and like the erosion of criticism in our age today. And she was talking about the bad art friend, which is one of my favorite. Oh my gosh, if you have not read The Art Friend, I'm gonna link it down below. Gift yourself a read of that because it was so much fun. Also, after you finish reading the actual essay, go into the comment section, because the comment section is like performance art. Like it is so fun to just like be immersed in that world for a little bit. But she was also looking at that. Then there was an essay on her living in Berlin. Then it ended with an essay on her anxiety. I wasn't trying to go in primed one way or another, but I think like for me, I want to see how you take us from point A to point B, and there was none of that. Then after reading this collection, I went down the rabbit hole. So this is what I had heard. I had heard, because I was with Janice and we were talking about this, but Lauren Oyler wrote a takedown of Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. Then I also saw that she also tore down Gia Tolentino's Trick Mirror. She became like well known because of that. This is what I heard, my little understanding of this. She wrote a London Review of Books a takedown of Trick Mirror, and apparently that like broke the internet. So she has a spiky reputation. And Manov, she wrote a sort of rebuttal on No Judgement in the book forum and absolutely tore Lauren to shreds. But I guess that's what Lauren Oyler was doing to her peers. So I just want to read some pull quotes. The book was originally to be called Who Cares? And perhaps that title should have been retained. Oyler is contemptuous of disagreement, quickly bores of research, and rigidly attempts to control the reader's responses. As a result, the writing is cramped, brittle. Oyler clearly wishes to be a person who says brilliant things, a Renata Adler of looking at your phone a lot, but she lacks the curiosity that would permit her to do so. The resulting collection reads like a juvenile burn book, totally uninterested in the world outside of her group chat. Finally, the pieces in No Judgement are airless, involuted exercises in typing by a person who spent too much time thinking about petty infighting and too little time thinking about anything else. A lot of people were saying, how does it feel to get a taste of your own medicine kind of thing? I don't know. I was just here for the drama. I had a time. I love when the book world is tussling. Then we read Victim by Andrew Boryga. This is a debut novel. I read this for book club, and the discussion around it was really, really fascinating and interesting. Basically, the premise of this book, we have Javier. Javier is a Puerto Rican boy who lives in the Bronx. His dad is a drug dealer, and mom is just trying to make ends meet. Javi's father goes to Puerto Rico. Javi goes to visit dad. There is a drug deal gone wrong, or they were just like at a party with all these people, and Javi's dad gets shot. That happens in like the first few pages of the book, so it's not a spoiler. And here Javi learns the power of victimhood. So when he returns back to school, he's receiving all of this empathy and he's getting like this validation and reward for this tragic thing that has happened to him, and he starts to put the lines together. Eventually he has this guidance counselor who comes into the school because he's applying to colleges. He's sort of telling them like, if you can tell a good sob story, you can get anywhere you want. The guidance counselor learns that Javi wants to be a writer, so they're like, all right, let's use your writing skills. Let's make this sob story because we can get you into one of these Ivies. We just have to learn how to milk the story in a specific way. Another lesson for Javi. So then he does eventually get accepted to this Ivy League school. He becomes involved in like the cultural club, and here he gets all of the language for all of these things that he didn't even know he was experiencing, but are part of like a person of color's experience. So he learns about systemic racism, he learns about white supremacy, he learns about microaggressions, he's learning all of this language. He is starting to sort of bend his own experiences to the language that he is being told is emblematic of his experience, even if he's never really labeled it or chronicled it like that in his mind. Javi's ambitions become that he wants to be a journalist, and he sort of learns from his earlier experiences that if he bends his stories and sort of yokes for dramatized truths, his stuff will get more clicks, will become more viral. And so he does that. He plays on that. He publishes a whole bunch of stories that are a little embellished, very reminiscent of the whole Hassan Minaj stuff with the emotional truths, where he was making up sort of skits, and then it hits the fan at the end. We're having also all of these students who are at this really expensive, seemingly like private Ivy League institution talking about the struggle, sticking it to the man. Once they leave the university, their little bubble, we start to see the issues of race interact with class. Javi's girlfriend Anais, she's like very wealthy and they want to move to New York, and Javi's like, we're moving to the Bronx, right? We're moving with our people. And she's like, but what about Brooklyn though? So we're sort of seeing the incongruity in being about the struggle and sort of making it your whole personality, but also wanting to maintain your comforts as someone who is of a different class. That complication was the most interesting sort of exploration in this. So it is like satirical, but it didn't lean into absurdities as much as I would have liked. I just feel like I wanted it to push a little more. It just felt a little surface level for me, but I will say, like, it was a good debut. It was a lot of fun. It was really funny. It has really strong voice. Always fun to pick it up. I laughed a bunch. If you liked Gino Diaz's voice, pick this up because I feel like it's very reminiscent of a Oscar Wilde sort of vibe without all the mujeriego womanizing stuff. But yeah, I would say this is a pretty solid debut, so I recommend this one. The next book we read was So Late in the Day. I've already returned this book to the library. This was a very short story collection, consisted of 3 stories. Antarctica, which has been previously published in Keegan's debut short story collection, Antarctica. So Late in the Day, which has made its round and it was previously published by the New Yorker. And then a middle story, which I don't remember. It was fun to read Antarctica again. I love that story. So Antarctica is a story about a woman who is married, who is wanting an affair before it is too late. She seeks a man, finds a man, they go home together, and then shit hits the fan. First time I read So Late in the Day, I listened to it on the New Yorker, and Claire Keegan read it herself, and then there was this really interesting discussion with George Saunders and the host of the show afterward. Definitely enjoyed So Late in the Day more when Keegan was reading it. It was fine the second time around. And then that middle story is not memorable. I don't remember what it was about, which I guess tells you how I felt about it. So those were the books that were read. I read 2 essays. The first was an essay by The Cut called The Case for Marrying an Older Man, and I feel like this chick went to Harvard, and she was talking about how in order to sort of rebalance the scales in, I mean, she didn't use these words exactly, but in order to rebalance the scales in heteronormative partnering, you have to marry an older man. She was saying that because of X you have to do Y, and she's like, I don't get why all the other Harvard girls, they're so smart, but they're like not doing this thing that is a really emblematic way to demonstrate your intelligence, is by like gaming the system and getting someone who's already gone through all of the growing up, someone who's already established and is financially okay, that you can just like plop your life into so that you can have freedom. And initially you're just like, no. But then she starts to go into all of these arguments and this interrogation about how when a woman is with a man, she has to mother that person. And so when you are in a partnership with someone who is the same age as you, as a woman in like a heterosexual partnership, there is an additional labor and additional weight, and you are sacrificing more. And in order to ensure that in your partnerships you're not the one who is siphoned from, you marry older. So I feel like her arguments were really interesting and compelling, and it's like like sort of the thing that has been centered in a lot of the books that I've been reading. I think back to like Days of Abandonment and how Olga has this piece about like, I built him, I made him. Also, Issa Rae's Insecure, that scene where Issa's having a conversation with her brother and she's like, I put in all this work for someone else to enjoy the fruits of my labor kind of thing. Yeah, and just like a look at how truly imbalanced relationships can be and all of the things that women often sacrifice. There's one line in it where she says that men are so good at taking and they're sort of socialized to be that way. So I thought it was so funny because it's like, sis, you're almost at the point. But I read that this was a rage baity essay, so maybe that was her intention. Really interesting arguments wrapped in like an erroneous argument. I would read it. Yeah, it was fun. There was another essay, The Making of a Literary It Girl. I was actually listening to Chanello and Cree's podcast, which is called Book Club, Girl Club. Let me get it. Girl versus Book. And they were interviewing a writer. And then there was a nylon piece that was published. I can't remember if the person that was interviewed was the writer of this piece, but they were kind of talking about the sort of change from book events happening at bookstores to book events happening at bars, how forward-facing authors have to be in order to sell their books, and certain literary writers have a very specific idea of what they want their book launch to be like and how they get to assert that creativity, but that also it is a place of privilege to be able to assert that creativity in how your book is launched. And it was also looking at whether this is like a New York phenomenon. I feel like I'm melding the conversation from that podcast with the essay, but I remember they were speaking about aesthetica, and the writer of that book was talking about her process in making sure it's marketed the way that she wants to market it, and she's celebrating it the way that she wants to celebrate it, because it is a big deal. It's like a birthday. Yeah, just like that conversation around how litfic in particular, like there's a specific type of book that is being marketed in a specific type of way for a specific type of reader. So that was an interesting essay. Those are the essays that have been read. Exhibits. I only went to one exhibit this month. It was Danielle McKinney's Quiet Storm. So Danielle, she was always an artist, but she really started painting during the pandemic, during lockdown. And she's like a 40-year-old woman who lives in New Jersey, and her paintings are stunning, gorgeous. I read an essay that was talking about her push against this idea that women are always depicted in scenes of labor, a black woman working or a black woman toiling, and instead is showing women in leisure, and the woman is always really done up, and it's like a beautiful portrayal of a woman at rest. I really like this collection. I went with Sophie, Biblio Sophie, and it was so nice to meet her. She's much taller in person. I was not expecting that, but it was really fun to experience that exhibit with her. We also saw another exhibit by a Mexican artist, which was okay, but really enjoyed Danielle's art. And then we did some author chats. At the beginning of April, Julia Alvarez was having a sort of book chat for the release of her book, The Cemetery of Untold Stories, and she did this alongside Angie Cruz, who wrote a couple of books. She wrote Dominicana, and she wrote How to Drown in a Glass of Water, and Elizabeth Acevedo, who has written a bunch of books in verse, a lot of YA, but who recently came out with Family Lore. And this was a really beautiful conversation talking about what it means to be a member of a literary community, how to uphold one another, how to share the microphone. It was a very interesting conversation because I think that there might be this sort of like elbowing to be the one voice from this community, and so they were really making room for what it means to hold each other's hands and sort of demonstrating how they have held each other's hand in their sort of like ascension through the literary world. It was really sad because Julia was like acknowledging her age, which I was like, don't do that. But she was talking about how like as she gets older, there are a ton of stories that are untold that she doesn't know if she'll have time to get to. They were just having a conversation about the stories that are told and the importance of those stories. It was a beautiful conversation. Julia Alvarez means a lot to me, and I went with Janice, who I met through BookTube, and so it was a really nice evening. However, it was storming so aggressively. I was like, where it happened was like pretty close to where I live, which never happens. So I was like, oh, I'll just walk there, it's fine. Barely made it. Like my umbrella in shambles. I was sitting in drenched pants the entire event. But I feel like efforting to get there, literally fighting through a storm to get to watch these women have a conversation made it all the more special. We also went to go see Pedro Cabiya. The event happened at Recirculation, which is an offshoot of Word Up, which is a bookstore in Uptown Manhattan. I've never been to that space, but it's a pay-as-you-wish model, so they have a really wonderful collection of used books and you just pay what you want. They were having an event with Pedro Cabiya. He is he's a Puerto Rican author who lives in DR, and he is recently coming out with a translation of his book Rainbow. It's about the US intervention when there was like the spread of communism in the Caribbean and the Dominican Civil War and all of that. Really, it just ended up being a conversation on translation.
To a translator, he's from Gaza, and he was translating a lot of the poems from poets from the Gaza Strip into Spanish, and we went on a conversation for hours just about a word.
Not just the act of translating from one language to another, but translating a culture, especially like Caribbean Spanish. Someone in the audience was saying, nuestro hablar, especially for Dominicans, is our everything. There's so much filled within our speak. And I think amongst Caribbean Spanish, how does someone who is working to translate that work make sure that they are honest to that rendition? When Pedro read his piece of it, there was so much lyricism and rhythm, and it was full. Like, it just felt large. Jessica went to read the translation. I felt fear because I was like, oh no, this feels a little bit pinched and it feels a little bit boxed in. And even when we were talking about it, like there are some words like tigre. Oh, what was the other one that they were talking about? But they were talking about their like very specific Dominicanisms that we have that resist translation. They sort of exist within the cultural confines of the island, and also how transient these Dominicanisms are, because in 5 years they no longer hold the same meaning. And I think Jessica handled it really well, but I'm curious to see, because I remember, like, for example, that word tigre was translated as tigress. Not the same thing, but I don't know what the proper translation of that word would be. Just like a fantastic, intimate, lovely conversation on language and legitimizing our language and how to maintain the integrity of our language and literature. It was really cool. Currently, we are reading First Love by Lily Dancyger, and I'm listening to Annibot, which is a fun time. That is our April wrap up. Good things have been read. As always, let me know what you have been up to, what you've been reading, and yeah, I think that's it.